Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send show. This is episode 192 and we're back on our Mobility Field Day 4 series, and today we're going to talk about Aruba. I'm here with Roel this morning. Hi Roel, how are you?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm good, refreshed. I got my coffee. I'm ready to go.
I got my coffee too. I'm ready to go too. So awesome. So today we'll talk about Aruba. They presented at Mobility Field Day 4 back in August, and we just wanted to give our thoughts on what they presented on. And Aruba is not, they're not new to Mobility Field Day, right? They're not even new to any type of tech field days. So they're very organized. They have everything on board. They have their marketing team. They have, the engineering team, and everyone is like, they like tuned like a Swiss clock to present everything on time, and it's very impressive.
They're veterans of the Tech Field Day. They've done Tech Field Day exclusives. Tech Field Day is there during the Aruba atmosphere, so they are not new to Tech Field Day.
They're not new at all, and you can see it because they were able to pack a whole bunch of information within I think an hour and a half we had with them. But they had like several presentations, I think 6 presentations back to back, with like demos. They're not afraid of doing demos, and I think they're notorious for doing demos at Mobility Field Days or even Tech Field Days event. So this time around we had demos as well and great presenters. So it was it was a very good session. We learned a lot actually.
Yeah, there was a lot of good presentations, a lot of good information that came out of a lot of these presentations they did. My favorite would be about the ones we're going to talk about. And so there's a lot of good data that we have to talk about here, a lot of the future technologies, but why don't we dive into it?
Yeah, exactly. So the first subject we heard about was Enterprise Passpoint, right? So Chuck Lucas is sorry, I'm missing him. Sorry, Chuck.
You're not
Chuck
the only one who messes
up. He presented on he actually presented on 2 different topics: Enterprise Passpoint and 6 gigahertz. The first topic, Enterprise Passpoint, was interesting because the day before we were at Cisco hearing about open roaming, right? So it was interesting to me anyway to hear about Passpoint as well. I just wish our main vendors on the market will just use the same type of technology and drive in the same
select
direction.
One, yeah. Well, Cisco does support, I think, what was called the Hotspot 2.0. This is the newer iteration of that, right? I think this replaces Hotspot 2.0. So it's a little bit more, I guess, closer to being standard, and I'm using air quotes there because, like you said, Cisco's got. You didn't see them?
Maybe you can can I hear them?
Can you hear them? Here you go. There it is. With open roaming from Cisco, it's more proprietary because you've got to join into their ecosystem there, and they don't have as many partners that's using open roaming. But Passpoint, there's a lot of documentation out there, and so you can easily implement this on your network. But I guess we should talk about what Passpoint is first before we get into the weeds here.
Yeah, so Passpoint it's actually a certification from the Wi-Fi Alliance. So if you go on the Wi-Fi Alliance website, you can search for the Passpoint certification and kind of read through it. But what's cool for us and even for the users is that it allows like seamless roaming between cellular networks and Wi-Fi networks. So let's say you're the owner of a Wi-Fi network in an enterprise environment, and you set up a roaming agreement with AT&T, for instance. Whoever comes with the AT&T phone will pretty much roam automatically between the cellular network and your Wi-Fi network, and in the back end, the user will be authenticated against the AT&T database, right, using the SIM card in the phone, and then it will just like seamlessly roaming. The user doesn't have to go into the Wi-Fi settings, select your Wi-Fi network, SSID, and so on. Everything is seamless, and the traffic is through your Wi-Fi. So a couple of advantages here. First, usually in some buildings, you have better Wi-Fi coverage than cellular, so you maintain a higher quality of service for the user. And second, it also allows traffic offload for the cellular providers, so the traffic goes on the Wi-Fi infrastructure and not on their cellular infrastructure, which just allows them to support more cellular devices outdoor.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of this is done through profiles by the provider. So if you've got your phone from AT&T, for example, there's going to be a profile on there for Passpoint. And so when you come into an environment that has Passpoint enabled on their wireless network, that's how you're automatically joining that network, because the network will broadcast within the frames Passpoint information. And that's how your devices understand that, hey, Passpoint is available. And so with that being broadcasted on the network, when you join it, you're able to do your phone calls and your data over Wi-Fi versus having to use your cellular, because we all know, like with these newer buildings or even the older buildings that have material where the signal can't penetrate through the building, this is where something is a lot more affordable for the operator, and also the signal gets propagated a lot easier through the building since they already have Wi-Fi installed. And if it's designed for voice, then Passpoint will definitely be the one technology to use.
I love Passpoint for the for the user experience, because you don't have to do anything. And as a demo, like what Chuck did is he put his phone into airplane mode, which means that his cellular cord was disabled, so only his Wi-Fi connection was up and running, and he was connected to an SSID that supported Passpoint in the Aruba office. And then he asked Keith to call him, and then Keith called him using his phone number, right? Yeah. And his phone rang just as usual, as if he was connected to the cellular network. So it also supports Wi-Fi calling and all of these features. So you're still able to receive your calls even if you connected to the Wi-Fi using Passpoint. It's like another bonus there for the end user. So for the end user, it's pretty much seamless, which is awesome. But in the back end for us, it means we have to handle agreements with the carriers, make sure they support it, make sure the authentication is happening. It's a little bit more work on the back end for us to make it work.
But it's not as much work as implementing a DAS or a distributed antenna system, right? So you're using your existing infrastructure to provide Passpoint. And then Chuck brought up a good point where if we're going to use something like CBRS, right? Like where does CBRS fit in, and all of the other cellular like 5G, they are still higher frequencies, right? So even if you were to bring in new equipment, you'd have to bring in new equipment, and then you have to wait for the clients to support those frequencies, which I think iPhone 11 is the only one right now that's supporting CBRS.
Yeah, I think his point for 5G is that 5G will be using frequencies relatively close to Wi-Fi, like 3.5-ish. Maybe higher frequencies in the future, which means that they won't have as good penetration as the previous generation of cellular networks, which means that in building, we're not going to have as good coverage from the cellular antennas placed outdoor. So then, implementing Passpoint could be a good alternative to a DAS system that you talked about, distributed antenna systems, because you don't have to run new cable, install new antenna. You can just leverage the infrastructure you have in place to pretty much support the service indoor. In terms of CBRs, I think it will be different use cases. CBRs, I think what I see, like how I see it used in the future, would be more for like services that requires very reliable connections. and guarantee reliable connections, and then that's when people will go CBRS. I'm expecting maybe in the security industry, in the manufacturing industry, in smaller campuses, outdoor areas. That's how I see it for now.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest hurdle with doing Passpoint is just having those agreements in place with your carriers, and then having it with multiple carriers, I think. And then also in the video, I remember you asked the question about those who travel. And so it depends if your carrier actually has agreements with other carriers in order for that to work.
Exactly. So because I didn't get to ask too much questions because they were on a schedule, but my phone was actually not connecting to the Passpoint Wi-Fi network. So I have phone. My carrier is my base carrier is in Canada, but when I go to the US, they have roaming agreements with carriers in the US. So I do get my cellular connection in the US. So everything was supposed to work properly if all the roaming agreements are in place. I don't really know, how it works with the roaming agreements, but for sure my phone wasn't connecting to the Passpoint network. So that's one piece I think is important, especially if we think about airports, public spaces where you have a lot of tourist people that rely on the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Because they don't have their cell phone, plan, like roaming including the cell phone plan. And I think in places like that, it's important to not only think about the local carriers, but also about the roaming agreements they have with countries.
Yeah, I agree. It's like you said, it's a better user experience, and also it's still secure, right? So you're still using EAP methods back to the carrier's authentication server, so that's still secure. And then the architecture is just a lot more simpler because all you're worried about is your infrastructure. Everything else is the carrier's infrastructure as it goes through to maintain that connection with your Wi-Fi calling and everything else, like even the offload of data.
Yeah, exactly. So it's seamless, secure, and like you said, it uses like eSIM or ePKA depending on the SIM card you have to do the authentication. So it's I would say it's as secure as the cellular networks.
Yep. And I'm looking at their slides, so it looks like they're supporting all of the major service providers. You've got AT&T, T-Mobile, Telus, Sprint, and Time Warner Cable or /Charter. So yeah, I think they said they were also trying to get more service providers on board, but that's who they're supporting right now.
Yeah, and talking about slides, obviously all the videos are available on the website. We'll put on the Mobility Field Day website. We'll put a link in the show notes, and also Aruba was kind enough to send us a slide, so I'll put it on the show notes as well if you guys want to follow the slides as you hear us talking about these different topics. All right, let's move on to the second topic, which is Wi-Fi on 6 gigahertz.
All right. The future of Wi-Fi.
Yeah, the future of Wi-Fi, right? How exciting is it? So Chuck, once again, he talked about it, and he's involved in the whole process with the FCC. So it's kind of like he knows what's going on, and he just wanted to give us an update on what the status is, what the challenges are, and all of this. So I think the situation has evolved a little bit since Mobility Field Day, as they had a meeting plan in September or early October, I think. But if you watch the video, you pretty much have a rundown of what the status is right now. So Aruba and the vendors, pretty much anyone in the industry, they want to try to get more spectrum in the 6 gigahertz band, so we can use Wi-Fi over there and get more channels, wider channels, maybe leverage higher data rates and for the future. And looking at the future, we'll be pretty much implementing Wi-Fi 6, so 11AX on 6 gigahertz.
Yeah, we're looking at about 1.2 gigahertz of spectrum in the US, and in Europe it's about 500 megahertz. But it's a large amount of spectrum because this allows us to leverage the 160 megahertz channel widths and 80 megahertz channel widths in order to see that throughput that's being advertised, right, by all these vendors. And I think this is a way for us for wireless to get to those speeds. And so Aruba's done a lot of this lobbying, and they're part of the policy making in order to make this available. And I think it sounds like they're pretty close to doing it. There's just a lot of incumbents in this frequency space, meaning there's already people using this spectrum, and they have to follow a certain set of rules in order for Wi-Fi to operate in the same frequency space.
Yeah, and it's not as simple as it sounds. In the 6 gigahertz frequency band, it's kind of going to be like in the 5 gigahertz frequency bands, where we have like sub bands, right? You know how we have Uni 1, Uni 2, Uni 2 extending, Uni 3 on 5 gigahertz. On 6 gigahertz, expecting to have Uni 5. And Uni 5, that's actually the same band that Europe is working on to be available for Wi-Fi in Europe as well. So Uni 5 is like one big band, and they're trying to have that band available actually all across the world, so we can have some unity there. In between different countries. And then in the US, they're also looking at Uni 6, Uni 7, Uni 8, which is adding more frequency space, but also which is adding more challenges because in those bands, you might have different incumbents that have different requirements that might not work well with Wi-Fi systems. And so you have to make sure that rules are in place to make sure that these incumbents have priority over Wi-Fi. It's kind of like DFS in 5 gigahertz, and so that's kind of like what they're trying to redefine right now. Technically, how is that going to work? What will be the restrictions for Wi-Fi communications, and so on. So that's kind of like what Chuck talked about during his presentation at Mobility Field Day, and that's a type of challenges they're facing right now, and they're trying to technically answer those challenges and present them to the FCC.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge for the other like Uni 6, 7, and 8 bands, only because it's got to be lower power, right? And lower power, I think Chuck was saying 14 dBm max.
Yeah.
And also it is very similar to DFS, except it's actually more similar to CBRS, where you've got what's called an AFC, or Automated Frequency Coordination, where there's a database of I guess frequencies and incumbents that are on those frequencies, and so you'd be the APs would have to be able to speak to this or see this database, and then select it's given a frequency that it could operate on, and just depending on the location, right? And so I remember Chuck said that you had to have connectivity to this database. Otherwise, if you can't reach that database, you wouldn't be able to use some of those frequencies. It's
very similar to CBRS. And, in terms of, restriction to lower power, like 14 dBm for us, like for indoor Wi-Fi, that's typical, right? We could work with that. No problem.
That's typically my max anyways for when I design for a lot of buildings.
Yeah, so I think it might be low power in terms of regulations, but for us engineers, 14 dBm is enough to make it work. Maybe not for wider channels, right? If you think about 80, 160 megahertz wide channels, obviously your noise will increase, so you might need to increase your transmit power a little bit. But if you're designing in those bands for 40 megahertz wide channels, I think we can make it work from a technical standpoint. So that talk was very interesting. Also,
if you're into the policy, I think it's really a complicated process, right? So you've got to deal with the FCC, you've got to deal with multiple incumbents, and he's very open and saying, he's very involved, and he's very open in saying like what's happening. And so I always enjoy his updates on 6 gigahertz because I'm not hearing it from anyone else, right? So Chuck gives us kind of the lowdown on what's happening and how they're testing. They have to do all these tests in order to show that, hey, our access points and devices will not interfere with the incumbents. Here's why. And so they do all these studies.
Yeah, it's very, and I think he was saying he was in DC every other week or something like that. So I think he's very active on the subject, and we trust him, and we hope he will make it work.
Yeah, and actually, the AFC would be required on Uni 5, part of Uni 6, and all of Uni 7.
Okay, so so that's very good to know. Also, if you want to know more about 6 gigahertz in Europe, we just got a talk at WLPC Europe last week about it. So Philip talked about it. So I also put a link in the show notes of that video as well, so you can have both the American view and the European view on the subject, and you can see where everyone is standing on the topic right now. Also, like 6 gigahertz also bring us a good point, or a good discussion point regarding hardware, right? Especially when we're talking to Aruba, they produce hardware. The obvious question is, when will the 6 gigahertz AP be available? Can we expect having 6 gigahertz compatible Wi-Fi devices soon?
And are the APs that I'm buying, are they 6 gigahertz capable? Right. That's probably a question from other people. Which what was his answer to that?
I can't remember, honestly. But I think if you want to have an AP that's 6 gigahertz compatible, first you need to make sure that the radio supports it. Then you need to make sure you have the proper antenna. So I think it will require new hardware.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, I believe it will. The APs now are not 6 gigahertz capable, so it's not going to be a firmware update that'll just turn it on. I remember he was mentioning they've had this discussion internally where they know 6 gigahertz is coming and they know which frequencies would probably be available first. But they were wondering, should we implement all of the uni bands and then have firmware turn it on, or do we just go with the uni bands we know that will be available? And part of that was spending more money on radios that will support all of the uni bands, which means the cost would have to be passed down to the customer. But then you still have this possibility that you might not use those frequencies. And so that's just kind of a discussion they've had internally. I don't think he settled on I don't think he said this is what we're going for. I think he was just more just talking it through with the audience.
Yeah, I think we might have different waves of AP products on the 6 gig end. Maybe the first wave will only support Uni 5, and then the rest will come after that. Especially if Uni 5 is Uni 5 is the only one band supporting in the rest of the world. Maybe Aruba will just say, okay, we'll create like a word AP, like a AP that can be deployed anywhere in the world that supports Uni 5.
Yeah.
And maybe later on we'll create like a US model that will just leverage the additional space. And I think we have time, because like those processes they take a long time.
He did mention that there'd have to be a lot of testing involved, and then after the testing is done, you've got to set up the database, and so that's not going to be a quick process. And that database, the way the database works, you've got to have a pilot as well. So there's going to have to be some people that test it out, make sure it's working the way it should. So we're still talking a long ways out, even after, let's say, FCC goes, all right, 6 gigahertz is available. There's still going to be some time after that for the testing, and then you got to wait for devices to be supplied with these 6 gigahertz capabilities. And
I was going to talk about that. The devices, like the device manufacturer, they are not going to produce 5 gigahertz devices if the FCC hasn't agreed to, free up the band for Wi-Fi use. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg issue there, right?
So you mean 6
everyone
gigahertz?
Is waiting for the FCC to open the bands, and after that, only the manufacturer will just design the product and produce them. If we start seeing some 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi devices by the end of next year, I'll be happy.
Yeah. Hopefully it goes that quick. But I mean, if you look at the latest Google announcement and their newest phones, they didn't even include Wi-Fi 6. And so that's an indication of like a slow rollout right there. They're not even, because Wi-Fi 6 hasn't been ratified, it's not, they feel that you're not going to get the benefits yet. So they're not implementing it in their phones. So possibly next year you'll see it with Google for Wi-Fi 6, which means if 6 gigahertz comes out next year, maybe they'll roll out the year after it's announced.
Anyway, Aruba, they gave us a timeline, and they're saying that by 2020 they'll have AXAP ship with 6 gigahertz support in the US.
Wow.
So I guess we'll see. All right, next subject. They presented a new outdoor AP. So Eric Johnson talked about. Eric Johnson is the outdoor guy. He came on the show to talk about MIMO. He has a lot of knowledge on the RF side. And by the way, the MIMO episode is one of our most popular episodes, I think.
It's a complicated topic, so it's a good one to listen to.
Yeah. And so Eric presented their newest AP, outdoor AP, which is like a modified 375 and 377 AP, if you know them. But they've been modified, so they're designed to be used in hazardous location, hazardous environments. So they changed a little bit of the material they use and the shielding of the AP. So it supports they have different grades. It supports the class 1, zone 2.
Class 1, yeah.
For the certification in hazardous environments. So if you install a lot of access points in manufacturing environments and you need something that meets those classifications, class 1, zone 2, you can look at this new outdoor AP. If you watch the videos, Eric goes into more details into how they made it happen.
Yeah, if you're like me and you go, what is a hazardous location? Like, what qualifies for that?
Anything that can explode.
Yeah, and anything with explosions, flammable gases, vapors, explosions. And so they've made this hardware that, and I think Eric made a good point about it not being where it might be able to, keep itself contained if it explodes internally, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's like explosion proof, right?
Yeah. Explosion proof. I think it's like the class 1, zone 1. I think, or it's like the highest level of certification. He explained that it's not that, it's just a level below. So if you're in an environment where you don't want it to explode, you'll still have to put it into an enclosure. I think that's what he said.
Yeah, this just prevents it from starting or spreading an explosion. So I think that's the one difference there with the classification. So it really looks like a normal outdoor AP. I wouldn't be able to tell.
Yeah, apart from that, I think it's the same. It's still an AC access point. I think he was talking about their plan on releasing an outdoor access point soon. But this one is still the AC access point.
Okay.
Next subject was the IoT. IoT was actually pretty cool.
Notice it's a trend.
Yeah, IoT is like a big trend.
Putting it on the AP is a trend. Yeah,
putting it on the AP. So that's pretty much what they've done. So with their new series of access points, they embedded Zigbee, Bluetooth into the access point, so the access point can handle those protocols, BLE and Zigbee. And what they also done is for previous generations, the 300 series, those APs have a USB port. So they actually developed a USB module that you can connect to those 300 series access points and then enable, extra features. So you can enable a Zigbee hub or something like that, which I found was pretty cool.
I can see the use case with it because I'm in an environment where we have wireless access points, but then we also have these Zigbee devices for things like door readers, and I think having to use this expansion radio for Zigbee support is a way to minimize how much infrastructure you actually deploy.
Yeah.
For this purpose. So I think I can see the use case. I don't know how many customers are actually using it and how it integrates with what you currently have, because you've got to have, I guess, the software or something, a controller that manages all these Zigbee devices.
And the what I really like about their solution is that they're not trying to push new access points on you. They also creating a product that you can just buy for your current infrastructure if you have like 300 series access points. So if you want to support IoT devices in the future, and they gave us some use cases that we can talk about, but you don't necessarily have to do a refresh. You can just buy those modules and leverage the APIs you have deployed right now.
Yeah, I can see that, and I know they're using Lee's favorite phrase here, like the digital transformation, and I guess that's what they're going for is environments that are really trying to leverage all these technologies, but not in a way where you're spending so much on multiple infrastructure.
And so the different use cases they were trying to show us was a label, a ticketing system in a retail store where you have, instead of having paper labels for each product, you have like an electronic label, and then managed by Zigbee or something like that, or any IoT technologies, and then you can change the price of your product, remotely using those technologies, right? You don't have to swap out paper labels.
Yeah, and I'm guessing those just have like a simple battery on them, so it's easy to replace.
Yeah, it's like it's like they use those very low power screens. Like Kindle type of
like
screens.
The paper ink screen. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't really consume a lot of energy. So it is those kinds of use cases that I think Cisco talked about as well, that coming to the industry. So in retail, maybe in manufacturing, you can expect to have those use cases. I think for us Wi-Fi engineers, it's also a good opportunity and a good time to learn about those IoT technologies and see how it will affect the way we do Wi-Fi, the way we design Wi-Fi. Can we just integrate it in our current infrastructure? So I think it's a good time for us to study those technologies, see how they work, learn how to work with them, analyze, design for them. The CWNP recently came out with a new course called CWSA that focuses a little bit on those alternative wireless solutions. At WLPC and at the Wi-Fi Trek or conference, Peter McKenzie also talked about a project he worked on where he was trying to design for, I think it was LoRa lights. And his challenges and the solution he found to analyze the protocol and so on. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to learn those alternative technologies and being able to answer the questions that would come from our customers.
Yeah, and I think that's the convergence that's happening with us as wireless engineers, as people look at our infrastructure and go, can we do this over what we currently have in our environment? And so this is where I see Aruba trying to leverage what they have with that USB port and having those modules there for easy extensibility. And I think that's just something they're barely showing to us, right? So we have to get familiar with it and understand what exactly is needed and what is it that we're implementing, because it's really just an overlay that you put on your wireless network. It's just a way for another device to connect to the infrastructure using something like Zigbee or BOE and be able to basically speak back to whatever controller, something that's managing them in the back end.
Yeah, integrated to your existing infrastructure. I think we're still early age with this, so I would expect Aruba and the other vendors to keep talking about it for the upcoming year, maybe next year, and we'll start seeing some implementations. But it's exciting. It's exciting for us.
Yep.
All right, next subject is enhanced security. So that was another good session. And Dan Harkins, which works for Aruba, presented the sessions, and he also does some work with the Wi-Fi Alliance. And so he was able to talk. He wanted to focus, just put it that way. He wanted to focus this specific presentation on DPP, right? So which is like a device, it means device provisioning protocol. The Wi-Fi Alliance name for it, I think, is Wi-Fi Easy Connect. And DPP is pretty much a way to easily onboard devices into the Wi-Fi network. And I think the target will be to, all those IoT devices that don't necessarily have a screen, where you can select, SSID and put a password. So all these devices, DPP just allows them to just connect to the Wi-Fi without having to, click on anything and keyboard or anything, or without having to download an application on your phone, then connect to Bluetooth to the device and then push a profile. So DPP is kind of like the solution to all of that. That's why they call it Easy Connect. Because they want to ease the onboarding of those devices onto the Wi-Fi in a secure way.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece here is it's actually more secure than the previous way of doing it, which was WPS. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with WPS because you've seen it on wireless routers in the home, right? You press a button and then on the router, and then you go to your device and turn on WPS, and then it connects to your wireless network. That method wasn't very secure, and there was a lot of vulnerabilities from that. And the recommendation was to just disable that feature. So now we have device provisioning protocol, where it still makes it easy to onboard devices, like you said, Francois, and it really is catered towards devices that don't have screens, that are a little bit more difficult to configure security wise. And so you use Wi-Fi Easy Connect, which is a certification from the Wi-Fi Alliance, and there's a lot of devices that have this certification. And I think it's great that Aruba is working on this, because previously in the other mobility field days, they've talked about WPA3, gave us a demo. They've talked about Enhanced Open and gave us a demo. And so, Francois, did they give you a demo on Wi-Fi Easy Connect?
Yes, we did a demo. So, and the demo was fun because Dan had a couple of, I think they were like scanners, barcode scanners, to onboard onto the Wi-Fi. And he gave one to me and he gave one to JD. And then to me, he also gave me like a barcode to scan. Mm-hmm. And then all I did to onboard the device was scan the barcode, and then the DPP did his magic and onboarded the device for me. I didn't have to do anything, and the device was connected to the Wi-Fi securely. Wow! And very JD cool. Asked him to onboard the device the old way, like putting the SSID name and and he was trying to time us to see who will finish faster, like who would finish the first. So it was kind of like a fun demo, just to showcase how easy it is. And I think the scanning, the QR code scanning is a great way of doing it. Let's say you're an IT admin and you have 100 new devices to onboard into the Wi-Fi. If all you have to do is scan the QR code, it's going to take you 10 minutes. Yeah, and then you'll be done. That's awesome.
Yeah, and probably some people would wonder, well, why don't they use something like some server to automatically provision those scanners? Well, some people don't have that expertise to set up those servers to have like a single source of configuration and push the configuration out to devices, or some of those devices might be older, although I mean, if you're going to use DPP, it's probably a newer device. But yeah, this is just a faster way of doing that using QR codes. You can probably use something like NFC. I think that's also in the Wi-Fi Easy Connect certification, and that I think would be a secure way of doing it too, because you have to be in proximity to do NFC. And yeah, it's a lot faster to configure, right? Just scan and go. You're good to go.
and wait for the tudung sound, and then you get. Also,
So how long did it take though between you and JD?
I can't remember. I have to watch the video, but it was much shorter for me, for sure. Also what I wanted, because we didn't talk about the technical aspect of it. If you watch the presentation, Dan goes into it and explains why it's secure and how the authentication is happening. And I believe the phone you use to onboard those devices has to be connected to the Wi-Fi first, and I think that's how it will pretty much use that device as a reference to onboard the other ones.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, you got to use like it's called an enrollee.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The configurator and the enrollee. The enrollee would be the scanner, and your configurator could be your phone, for example. And then that's how it pushes the configuration. And then part of the security that's in there is you've got like a 4-way handshake, PMKs. The Wi-Fi Alliance document is actually really good in describing DPP. So if you go to their site, go to Wi-Fi Easy Connect, there is an actual technical document you could download.
All right. And moving on to the next subject, which is the last one actually for this episode. It's they talked about data analysis. So I think it was I was expecting this to come on the table. Data analysis. So Aruba is trying to do kind of what Nyansa is doing with their product, trying to analyze all the data coming to their cloud, leveraging some sort of algorithm to come up to organize the different data from different verticals, organize the different customers that looks alike, and then target recommendations based on their profile. Right? They call it peer. Aruba called it peer comparison recommendations. So they would just, with all the data they have coming to Aruba Central, they'll be able to say that a typical hotel has this characteristic. So if you're a hotel and you're having issues, we recommend you doing this if you want it to work well. And then they base that recommendation on the other hotels that work well, and they bring all that data back into their system, and then they display to the user under their insight feature that you can get now with Aruba Central, and you can see all that insight on the dashboard. What's cool with the new data insight, I guess, is that they now get data from the AP, they get data from the switch, they get data from the WAN if you have the all stack HPE solution, and they also can get data from the sensors if you have CAPE deployed in your environment, CAPE sensors, which makes the data a little bit more reliable, right? They can do more correlations and make it smarter. You just need to buy everything from HPE.
Yeah, I believe this is the acquisition they made of Net Insight. And it's more of like their analytics platform, right? But does it give you actionable data? Like what kind of actions can you perform from the data they give you? I guess that would be my question.
I'm not too sure. I've never used it. They showcased some numbers. They were just like they didn't really showcase the stuff you will do, but they were just showing us the numbers, type of data. They showed us a nice graph of how they classify all the customers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's still very early. The new Aruba Central is new from this year. And they added the insight, I think, like right after or right before Mobility Field Day in August.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the way I see it then is you can gather information on the types of devices on your network and then probably tie that back to some sort of policy and create a policy to say these devices cannot connect to these networks, or set up some sort of security policy based on that. And
maybe
I guess we'll see how
some
that
RF recommendation as well.
Yeah, that would be pretty neat in order to see, okay, here's how this device works over the wireless network. Here are these settings you'll need to have enabled in order for it to have a better experience over your wireless network. That would be a interesting like feedback that the system gives you.
Also, what I mean, if I'm what I would like to see as well is, let's say I'm a hotel and I have Wi-Fi, and then the system says that 90% of the hotels implemented a new change and it improved the performance of the Wi-Fi network by like 10%. I would like the system to give me a notification and tell me, 90% of our hotel customers did this and improved the Wi-Fi by 10%. You might consider doing it.
Yeah.
And then
you can be like the systems can say, yeah, your splash page isn't really allowing people to connect. You should disable this.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I can see this being implemented kind of a distributed environment, and seeing how different sites are like it collects data from the different sites and able to give you that information up front, and so that way you don't have to analyze each individual site. But yeah, I'd like to see more come out of this. I think from Mobility Field Day 3, they touched upon this, and I think they gave us just a basic screen of the device types that they were able to discover, but nothing in depth on the actual product.
Yeah, so we'll see how this evolves, but that was pretty much, Aruba at Mobility Field Day 4. A lot of different topics, a lot of interesting presenters, and yeah, a lot of information in 1 hour and a half, for sure. If you get a chance to watch the videos, I would recommend you doing so. You'll get a lot of information from them.
Yeah, I definitely recommend watching the videos. My favorite ones were the Passpoint and the 6 gigahertz for Wi-Fi. Definitely check those out. It's very insightful, and you'll actually gain a lot of knowledge just by watching these videos. Aruba did a great job, and I'm looking forward to seeing the progression of this for the next Mobility Field Day that they join.
And you have Aruba Central, right, with your Wi-Fi 6 AP?
Yeah, I do. So I'm running the AP 514. I've got Aruba Central. It's been
you should look at your insights.
Fine. I should. I deployed it right before WLPC Prague, and I haven't logged in since. And all I know is I came home and I was like, why is it operating on 80 megahertz? And I was like, well, it's okay. I'll keep it on
your
there.
wife was happy?
Yeah, everyone's happy. Okay, all so my devices were working.
All right. So on top of this podcast, some other delegates wrote some blog article about Aruba presenting at Mobility Field Day. So we included those links as well in the show notes if you guys want to read them as well and get their point of view on the subject.
Cool.
All right, guys, that's it for this week. Thank you very much for following us along. We'll have one last episode for the Mobility Field Day series, which will be on Fortinet. And then, we'll get other fun episodes for the podcast before the end of the year. And then if you want more details, you can go to clear2send.net/192. Don't hesitate to share what you like on social media, Twitter and LinkedIn. And then we'll catch you back next week. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.